Picture a hotel room in downtown Toronto. Like, it's February 2009, pitch black, middle of the night,
Right.
and a 38-year-old man just jolts awake in a cold sweat. I mean, he's breathing hard. He just had a nightmare.
But it's not a normal nightmare, right? Not like falling or being chased.
No, exactly. In this dream, he's standing in an empty concrete locker room. He's dressed in full hockey gear, and his skate laces just keep snapping in his hands.
Oh, man.
Yeah, he pulls them tight and they break. He ties them again, they tear. And all the while, he can hear this muffled roar of like 20,000 people down the hall.
That is just so visceral.
It is. His team is losing, the clock is ticking down, and he's completely physically paralyzed by something as mundane as a frayed piece of cotton.
You know, it's striking how the subconscious mind works. That is basically the quintessential stress dream.
Totally.
It's not just about failure. It's about this profound lack of control, right? The terrifying anxiety of knowing people are relying on you, the spotlight is blinding, and you are trapped. You literally can't do your job.
And what makes this so crazy is who is actually having the dream? I mean, this isn't some rookie terrified of his first big game.
Right. This is Mats Sundin.
Exactly. The longest-serving non-North American captain in NHL history. A Hall of Famer. A guy who played over 1,300 professional games.
He was famous for being just a block of ice under pressure.
Exactly. Yet on this specific morning, his massive house in Toronto, the city he basically poured his blood into for 14 years, it's sitting dark and empty just a few miles away.
Because he's sleeping in a sterile hotel bed.
Yeah, because today he has to wake up and play against the Toronto Maple Leafs for the very first time wearing the jersey of the Vancouver Canucks.
That image, I mean, a veteran superstar reduced to cold sweats over snapping laces, it really frames the whole underlying tension of what we're doing today.
It really does. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are looking at excerpts from Mats Sundin's autobiography, Home and Away.
But just to be clear, our mission here isn't to just, rattle off hockey stats or recount a sports career.
No, not at all. We want to unpack the psychological architecture of a guy caught between two drastically opposed cultures.
Right. We need to understand how this quiet, family-oriented kid from a Swedish suburb survived and, actually thrived inside the absolute unforgiving pressure cooker of the Toronto media market.
Because at its core, this isn't just a hockey story. It's a deep dive into the emotional weight of professional sports, the weaponization of loyalty, really.
Oh, absolutely. It's about what it actually takes to protect your own psyche when a multi-million-dollar industry is actively trying to consume you.
Right. And to understand how Mats managed the blinding spotlight of Toronto, we actually can't start in Canada.
No, we have to rewind to a completely different universe.
We have to look at his foundation in 1970s Sweden, specifically his parents, Tommy and Gunilla, because, their contrasting backgrounds really forged the blueprint of his character.
They really do. They represent two very distinct cross-sections of Swedish life. So Tommy grew up in Bollnäs, which is a moderately sized industrial town.
Kind of standard blue collar.
Yeah, exactly. But Gunilla's background is much more extreme. She was raised in this tiny village called Kanullisjärvi.
And when we say tiny, we mean tiny.
Oh, yeah. The population was under 150 people. It's 30 miles north of the Arctic Circle.
Just to put that into perspective for you listening, 30 miles north of the Arctic Circle means enduring winters that are almost entirely dark.
Yeah, pitch black.
We are talking about a community of loggers and miners. Survival there required a really severe, unyielding kind of hardiness.
And the culture of that village was heavily influenced by Laestadianism.
Right.
It's an extremely rigid, conservative branch of Lutheranism. To give you an idea of the austerity here, some of the villagers actively refused to hang curtains in their windows.
Because they called them what?
They referred to them as the devil's underwear.
The devil's underwear. That detail is just so incredibly evocative. It strips away any romanticized notion of this, cozy Scandinavian childhood.
Exactly. It replaces it with this stark utilitarian worldview where any kind of vanity or excess was literally viewed as a sin.
And that deeply ingrained hardiness, it totally stayed with Gunilla. It manifested practically when she and Tommy were a young married couple in the early 70s.
Right, they were living in a cramped apartment near Stockholm.
Yeah, and it's Gunilla who has the vision to build a life. She finds this steep, heavily wooded, completely undeveloped lot in a suburb called Sollentuna.
And Tommy is hesitant, right, because of the sheer scale of the work.
Yeah, he's overwhelmed. But Gunilla's resolute. She essentially tells him, If you don't buy it with me, I will buy it myself.
Which is just such a power move.
Totally. So they buy it. And they take out this massive loan with a staggering 14% interest rate.
14%.
Right. And Tommy, who, by the way, works for a telecom company, he is not a contractor, he spends 2 years building their house entirely by hand.
He literally blasts the bedrock himself.
Yes. He shadows the plumbers he hires, just standing there watching their every move so he can figure out how to do it himself the next time to save money.
That is the ultimate sweat equity. He frames the walls, puts on the roof.
But from a psychological standpoint, the most critical feature of this property wasn't actually the house itself.
Right, it was the geography. The house sat on this hill sloping down to a lake. And during the long Swedish winters, that lake just froze solid.
Which basically became Tommy's second full-time job. I mean, he would spend his evenings out on the ice in the freezing dark with just a bucket and a shovel.
Desperately trying to flood the ice fast enough to create a rink.
Right, all while his 3 sons are practically vibrating with impatience up the hill, waiting to skate.
And when you look at the environment those parents created, it stands in such stark contrast to the modern machinery of youth sports today.
Oh, completely. Today, we've totally normalized the hyper-intense sports parent.
Yeah, the parent who hires private coaches at age 7, who screams at teenage referees.
The ones who view their kids' athletic talent as, like, a speculative asset or a ticket to wealth.
Right. But the Sundin household operate on a completely different frequency.
They supported the kids' passions, absolutely. Mats mentions this red hockey net they got for Christmas that he and his brothers just shot pucks at from dawn until dusk.
And Tommy was the classic dad driving Mats to 3 different rinks in a single day for various practices.
But they never pushed the dream on him. They never acted like his hockey was a retirement plan.
Because for Tommy and Gunilla, hockey wasn't a career path. It was a vehicle for character development.
Right. The focus was relentlessly on personal accountability.
There is this defining moment in the text when Mats hits his teenage years. He is clearly gifted. He's playing for elite youth teams, but he's also a normal teenager.
Yeah, he wants to go out to parties, stay out late, socialize.
And as a result, Tommy is having a really hard time dragging him out of bed for these grueling early morning practices.
Now, if you think about a modern sports parent, they might sit the kid down and say, you are throwing away your talent. You could make millions. Do you know how many kids would kill for this shot?
But Tommy doesn't say that at all.
No. Tommy issues an ultimatum based purely on commitment. He tells Mats, you do not have to keep playing hockey. You can quit right now, today. I will still drive you wherever you need to go.
But if you are going to play, you need to make the full commitment. You need to go to sleep on time, and you need to get your homework done.
The underlying message was so clear. Your talent does not excuse you from your obligations.
Which brings up a fascinating question, right? If his parents weren't pushing him to be a superstar, where did that elite killer instinct actually come from?
Exactly. Because you don't play 1,300 NHL games just because you're polite and do your homework.
No, you definitely don't. Looking at the anecdotes in the text, it seems his entire athletic psychology was forged by his birth order.
Yes. He was the middle child. He was literally born a chaser.
That's a brilliant way to frame it. His mother noted that the minute Mats learned to crawl, he was desperately trying to chase down his older brother, Patrick.
And when Patrick and his older, bigger friends would go down to the frozen lake to play, Mats would beg his mother to force Patrick to include him.
And Patrick's friends were absolutely not taking it easy on him.
No. Mats couldn't even skate properly yet. He was constantly tripping over cracks in the ice, falling flat on his stomach, scraping his face, popping back up.
They never passed the puck to him out of pity.
Never. If he wanted to touch the puck, he had to skate faster, fight harder, and go take it from boys who were much bigger than him.
Being the annoying younger brother basically installed this relentless internal engine in him.
Yeah, he spent his childhood chasing Patrick on the lake, which trained him to spend his teen years chasing men on the ice in Sweden.
Which ultimately prepared him to chase legends like Wayne Gretzky in the NHL.
Exactly. I mean, talent is a baseline, sure, but that specific type of engine, that only comes from having to fight for your place at the table every single day.
And that internal drive was balanced by this incredible sense of discipline, which is perfectly illustrated by the story of Torre, the referee.
Oh, man, the red card story on the gravel pitch. This is honestly my favorite scene in the entire book.
It's deeply revealing about the foundational values Mats internalized long before he ever saw a professional paycheck.
So every summer, the family makes this grueling 15-hour drive north, back to Gunnella's home village, Kainalesjärvi.
Right, the village with the devil's underwear.
Exactly. Mats is about 10 years old. He's playing in these local, highly competitive soccer games on this terrible gravel field.
And the referee for these matches is a local man named Tor.
Right. Tora is an adult living with a developmental disability, and he takes his job as a referee with life or death seriousness.
He is wearing a full official referee uniform he ordered from a catalog, complete with the breast pocket holding his red and yellow cards.
He officiates these local gravel games as if they are the World Cup final.
So during one of these intense games, 10-year-old Mats gets violently knocked down on the gravel.
He scrapes his knees, he totally loses his temper, and he yells a Swedish swear word, "Jävla skit."
Fucking shit.
Yeah. And before the words even finish echoing, the whistle blows. Tor marches straight over, reaches into his pocket, pulls out the red card, and completely ejects a 10-year-old boy from the game for swearing.
Mats is absolutely devastated. He has to take his grandmother's wobbly, oversized bicycle and ride it all the way home.
Crying the entire way, swallowing mosquitoes in the summer air.
He is terrified of what his parents are going to say, assuming he is in massive trouble for getting thrown out of a game.
But when he gets home and tearfully confesses, Tommy and Gunilla don't yell at him. They burst out laughing.
They find the whole thing hilarious.
Yeah, they just tell him to go back the next day and apologize.
Which he does. Tor lets him play again, and the red card is never mentioned by anyone ever again.
But Mats explicitly notes in the book that he never, ever swore on that soccer field again.
If we pull back and look at the psychological mechanics of that story, it is a masterclass in organic boundary setting.
Absolutely. He was learning hard lessons about respect, authority, and emotional regulation in a tiny village of 150 people.
The consequences were real, but the environment was safe. He was light years away from the commercialized, ruthless pressure of professional sports.
But that isolation couldn't last forever. Which brings us to the inevitable collision, right?
Right. How does a kid with this deeply grounded, humble foundation survive being thrust into the hyper-commercialized billion-dollar business machine of North American sports?
The transition happens with whiplash-inducing speed. The catalyst is a famous Swedish youth tournament called TV Pucken.
Mats is 15 years old. This is the very first time his games are being broadcast on national television.
It's the first time he can physically feel the glare of the cameras, the weight of thousands of eyes on him.
And in that environment, he discovers something profound about his own neurochemistry.
While his peers are literally throwing up in the locker room trash cans from anxiety, their hands shaking so badly they can't tape their sticks, Mats feels this incredible sense of calm.
The pressure doesn't crush him. It actually elevates him. He feels taller. He thrives under the spotlight.
Yeah, he goes out, dominates the tournament, scores multiple goals, handles the post-game interviews like a seasoned pro, and goes home feeling just on top of the world.
And this is where his father's grounding proves invaluable.
Oh, this part is so good. Mats walks in the door, glowing from a nationally televised triumph, and Tommy looks at him and asks, "Did you finish your homework for tomorrow?"
That is just incredible parenting. You just won a national championship on TV, but you still have algebra at 8 a.m., so hit the books.
It forces the ego to remain tethered to reality.
But despite Tommy's best efforts, the outside world had definitely noticed. NHL scouts began quietly appearing at his games in these frigid Swedish arenas.
And this rapid ascent culminates in the 1989 NHL draft, held in Minnesota.
Right, Mats makes history. He is drafted #1 overall by the Quebec Nordiques,
becoming the very first European-born player to ever go first overall in the NHL.
But the culture shock for the Sundin family when they arrive in Minnesota is just staggering.
To fully grasp this, we have to talk about the historical context of the late 1980s. In Sweden, hockey was not a lucrative, glamorous business.
Not at all. Even the elite players in the top Swedish leagues were making the equivalent of a public school teacher's salary.
Yeah, many of them had to hold down day jobs during the season just to pay their mortgages.
Mats himself, while playing at a highly competitive level, was studying to be an electrician.
And driving a delivery van around Stockholm, selling bundles of screws for a local construction company.
And suddenly, this humble family is sitting in boardrooms in Minnesota, across from NHL executives who are casually throwing around multi-million-dollar figures.
The disconnect was monumental. In the 1980s, the NHL machine viewed these young players, especially Europeans, as raw commodities.
They were assets, things to be acquired, marketed, and maximized for profit.
But Tommy and Gunilla, They approach this massive corporate draft with the innocence of dropping their son off at a local community club.
Tommy's primary concerns in these meetings weren't about the structure of the signing bonus or marketing rights.
No, he is sitting across from the Nordiques management, these hardened, cutthroat hockey executives, asking them, where exactly will Mats live? Who is going to cook for him and make sure he eats properly?
What happens if he breaks his leg?
He is essentially asking a billion-dollar sports franchise to act as a surrogate parent.
Meanwhile, Mats himself is far from a polished, media-trained commodity. Physically, he was described by scouts as having a lamp cord physique.
A lamp cord. I mean, he was tall, 6'3", but he only weighed a stringy 175 pounds.
And his first press conference is just an absolute disaster of translation and naivety.
He doesn't speak a word of French, which is highly problematic when you are drafted to be the savior of Quebec City.
So when reporters ask him when he thinks he'll be ready to play in the NHL, he naively answers, maybe 2 years.
Which completely horrifies the management, who need him on the ice immediately to sell tickets.
And then the kicker. A reporter asks him what he knows about Quebec City.
An 18-year-old Mats grins and says, I know it's a nice town and it has a lot of girls.
Which is, of course, the singular driving thought of an 18-year-old boy.
Sure, but it is an absolute nightmare for a franchise PR director trying to present their new #1 pick as this focused, disciplined savior.
But the awkward press conference was really nothing compared to the storm waiting for him back home.
Oh, right. When they returned to Sweden, the business reality of modern sports just slammed into them.
His Swedish club, Djurgårdens IF, flat out refused to let him out of his contract to go play in the NHL.
This was a huge, pivotal moment in international hockey relations. For decades, the European club system had developed these incredible talents, only to watch the wealthy NHL swoop in and poach them for absolutely nothing.
The European clubs were realizing they needed financial compensation, and Mats just became the unwilling pawn in a geopolitical business dispute.
And the Swedish media, who had just spent years building him up as their golden boy, turned on him with terrifying speed.
They completely weaponized his desire to play in the NHL, framing it as a treasonous betrayal of Swedish hockey.
A board member publicly threatened to ban him from ever playing for the national team again.
And the vitriol trickled down to the grassroots level, too. There's this horrifying detail where a trainer for a Swedish team allegedly taped a photograph of Mats to the inside of a locker room toilet bowl.
With the words, "Shoot here," written on it.
Just brutal. It was a brutal introduction to how quickly a community will excommunicate a hero when money and loyalty come into conflict.
Eventually, lawyers get involved, a financial settlement is brokered, and Mats is legally permitted to head to Quebec.
But crossing the Atlantic was just the first hurdle. Surviving the actual on-ice product of the NHL presented a whole new set of cultural and physical dangers.
He arrives in Quebec and immediately gets a lesson in the unspoken hierarchy of an NHL locker room.
Right, he had worn number 19 his whole life. He walks in, and the captain, Joe Sakic, already wears 19.
And you do not ask the captain for his number. So Mats just takes 13, simply because his birthday is February 13th.
He's suddenly sharing a room with absolute deities of the game, including Guy Lafleur.
But more shocking than the star power was the fundamental way the game was played in North America.
To understand the culture shock, you really have to look at the ideological divide in hockey during the late 80s and early 90s.
In Europe, hockey was played on a larger ice surface. The philosophy was built entirely around speed, puck possession, and elegant skill.
But in North America, the ice was smaller, the game was claustrophobic, and the culture was heavily defined by the enforcer era.
This was the era of the Broad Street Bullies hangover. Fighting wasn't just a byproduct of anger. It was a deeply ingrained strategic tool.
Right. If your team was losing, the coach would tap a guy on the shoulder, and his literal job was to go punch someone in the face to shift the momentum.
To a Swedish player, this was utterly illogical. Like, why would you purposefully take a penalty, put your team at a disadvantage, just to prove a point about toughness?
And this philosophical difference bred a massive toxic prejudice against European players.
The North American hockey establishment felt deeply threatened by these elegant skaters who were making their gritty, blue-collar defensemen look foolish.
It challenged their cultural ownership of the game and their very definition of masculinity.
Commentators, most notably Don Cherry, popularized the derogatory label "Chicken Swede."
Yeah. Portraying European players as soft, cowardly, and unwilling to pay the physical price to win.
Mats had actually tasted the xenophobia before he was even drafted.
Oh,
During a youth tournament in Canada, he and his Swedish teammates got into an elevator with some Canadian players.
and the Canadian kids looked right at them and called them chicken Swedes straight to their faces.
The expectation in the NHL was that if you wanted to shed that label, you had to drop your gloves, bare-knuckle box, a 220-pound enforcer, and bleed on the ice.
But Matt's approached it with a completely different psychological framework.
Right, he was receiving incredibly blunt mentorship from veterans like Guy Lafleur.
Yeah, Mats would try to play the European way, trying to elegantly stick-handle the puck through 3 defensemen, and he would inevitably get flattened.
He'd come back to the bench, and Lafleur would slide over and bark, "Tabernacle, Mats! Fuck! Too fancy! Just shoot the fucking puck!"
Lafleur was essentially telling him, the ice is smaller here, the defensemen are meaner, you don't have the time or the space to be an artist, you have to be an executioner.
Just shoot.
Exactly. But the way Mats adapted without compromising his character is what's truly fascinating. He didn't start picking fights just to appease the North American media.
Right. I think the narrative of what constitutes toughness in sports is so flawed. The media demanded he prove his toughness by fighting.
Right.
But true psychological toughness, the kind that takes incredible mental fortitude, was Mats utterly ignoring the xenophobia, ignoring the columnists calling him soft.
Ignoring all the noise and simply going out and producing point-per-game numbers on a last-place team while living 4,000 miles away from everything he knew.
And what kept him sane during that chaotic transition was that he never severed his connection to his roots.
There's this deeply charming anecdote about Tommy visiting Mats in Quebec during those early years.
Mats is now a millionaire, a franchise player living independently in his own apartment.
Tommy walks in, completely ignores the NHL glamour, and immediately inspects Mats like a physician to ensure he hasn't lost weight.
Classic Tommy. And then Tommy zeroes in on a fish tank that Mats had bought for the apartment.
He looks at the fish tank, shakes his head, and says, "You can't have fish. You travel too much. Who is going to feed them?"
And he literally forces Mats to get rid of the fish tank. It is the ultimate dad move.
You might be the highly paid savior of the Quebec Nordiques, but in Tommy's eyes, you're still a kid who lacks the logistical foresight to care for a goldfish.
It's a hilarious moment, but it served a really vital psychological function. It reminded Mats that his worth wasn't tied to his NHL status. It was tied to his fundamental humanity and responsibility.
And you see that grounding perfectly crystallized when he represents Sweden on the international stage.
Yes, the 1991 World Championship. This is a cinematic moment. Sweden is playing the USSR for the gold medal.
The Soviet Union at this time is an absolute terrifying juggernaut in international hockey.
It's a tie game. They are deep into the third period. Mats gets the puck and accelerates down the wing.
And the defenseman closing the gap on him is none other than Vyacheslav Fedosov.
Fedosov was a legendary Soviet defenseman. And the profound poetry of this moment is that Fedosov is the exact player Mats used to pretend he was playing against when he was shooting pucks in his driveway in Sollentuna.
Mats is bearing down on his childhood idol. And in that high-stakes, breathless moment, he doesn't try a complicated NHL move.
No, he executes the exact, simple move his father taught him years ago. Fake the goalie. Just a little deke to throw him off.
He drops his shoulder, executing a flawless deke that completely freezes the Soviet goaltender.
Pulls the puck to his backhand and roofs it right into the top corner of the netting. Sweden wins gold.
It is the ultimate literal vindication of the driveway dreams.
But just as Mats begins to find his rhythm, his identity, and a sense of peace in the relatively quiet market of Quebec City, the harsh business realities of the NHL intervene yet again.
Right. The Nordiques are struggling financially in a small market. Ownership changes, economic pressures mount.
And in the summer of 1994, everything is upended. He gets traded, but he doesn't just get traded to another quiet market. He gets traded to the absolute white-hot epicenter of the hockey universe.
He gets traded to Toronto.
The summer of 1994 brings a blockbuster trade that shook the entire league. The Toronto Maple Leafs decided to trade their beloved captain, Wendell Clark, to Quebec in exchange for Mats Sundin.
And the circumstances of how Mats finds out about this trade are just incredibly surreal.
The contrast between where he was and what he was walking into couldn't be starker. When the trade happens, Mats is deep in the remote Swedish wilderness near Kiruna.
He is 40 miles away from the nearest paved road.
Completely off the grid, fishing with his brothers and cousins. They are slathered in jungle oil to fend off the swarms of Arctic mosquitoes, completely detached from the NHL business machine.
And suddenly, the tranquility is shattered. They hear a mechanical roar over the trees. A helicopter descends and lands right on the shoreline next to their fishing spot.
Wait, they literally flew a helicopter into the remote wilderness.
Yes. The door slides open, and out steps a reporter and a cameraman from Expressen, which is Scandinavia's largest newspaper.
The Toronto media machine is so powerful, so desperate for content, that its shockwaves literally dispatched a helicopter into the remote Arctic wilderness just to get a quote.
The visual of that scene is absurd. The reporter is shoving a microphone into Matt's face, demanding his thoughts on replacing a legend like Wendell Clark.
While right behind the reporter, the cameraman is getting absolutely devoured by mosquitoes, leaving visible streaks of blood on his forehead.
All the while, Mats's brothers are sitting on the riverbank trying not to burst out laughing at the sheer lunacy of the situation.
But that helicopter is the perfect, terrifying metaphor for Leafs Nation. It doesn't matter where you hide, it will find you.
Right. To understand the crucible Mats was walking into, we really need to deconstruct what Leafs Nation is. Calling them a fan base is insufficient.
As Sundin notes in the text, it is a self-sustaining universe with its own immense crushing gravity.
The ecosystem in Toronto is unparalleled in hockey. You have dozens of beat reporters, radio hosts, and television pundits who make their entire living analyzing this one specific team.
Every single day, they need content. They analyze trade rumors, body language, locker room dynamics, and even what the players are eating for dinner.
Every game at Maple Leaf Gardens is sold out, packed with corporate executives in the lower bowls and diehard fanatics in the bleachers.
Every single loss is analyzed not just as a bad night, but as a moral failing, like a civic tragedy.
And the media actively, knowingly profits from panic. The sources point out a very cynical truth. The only thing that generates more clicks, more newspaper sales, and more radio callers than a story of ultimate victory in Toronto is a story about a catastrophic losing streak.
The media machinery runs on anxiety and controversy.
And into this anxiety machine walks Mats Sundin, a quiet, introverted Swede, tasked with replacing Wendell Clark.
We really have to understand the psychological weight of that. Wendell Clark wasn't just a player, he was a folk hero.
He was a farm boy from Saskatchewan who hit like a freight train and fought anyone who looked at his teammates wrong.
He embodied the blue-collar, bloody-knuckle ethos that Toronto fans romantically identified with.
Replacing a deity like that requires an immense, almost unnatural level of psychological fortitude.
If Mats had tried to pander to the fans by trying to be Wendell, picking fights, playing outside his nature, he would have failed miserably, and the city would have crucified him for being a fraud.
He had to win the city over by being the exact opposite. Stoic, hyper-consistent, elegantly skilled, and relentlessly professional.
Fortunately, before he even left Sweden, he received a masterclass in public relations from another Swedish icon who had survived the Toronto Crucible.
Barshi Salming.
Yes.
Yeah.
Salming had played defense for the Leafs for over a decade in the 70s and 80s, bearing the brunt of the early xenophobia. And he happened to be in Kiruna for a charity game right after the trade.
Salming takes control of the narrative brilliantly. He takes the microphone in front of all the Toronto reporters who had flown over.
First, he validates the fans' grief. He praises Wendell Clark, acknowledging what a legend he is.
Then he expertly manages expectations, asking the city to just give Mats a chance to be his own player.
And to cap it off, he physically forces a Toronto Maple Leafs jersey, which is several sizes too small over Matt's head for the cameras.
It was a perfectly executed passing of the torch from one Swedish legend to the next, giving Mats a vital shield of credibility before he even landed in Canada.
But once he arrived in Toronto, shielding himself daily required constructing an impenetrable psychological fortress.
Right, he couldn't rely on Salming anymore. He had to build his own coping mechanisms, and he did this through radical, unyielding routine.
We see this in his daily commute. Despite being a multi-millionaire, Mats and his teammate Dave Ellett would walk to Maple Leaf Gardens on game days.
In the dead of the Toronto winter, freezing wind whipping off Lake Ontario, they would put their heads down and walk the city blocks to the arena.
That isn't just about getting fresh air. From a psychological standpoint, routine is the primary defense against anxiety and external chaos.
Exactly. When you are surrounded by a media market that is constantly trying to dictate your emotional state, telling you that you are a god when you win and a disgrace when you lose, engaging in mundane, repetitive physical actions acts as a cognitive anchor.
It reduces cognitive load. It establishes a locus of control. The walk to the arena was a daily physical reminder that the noise outside didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the structure of the work.
He also anchored himself to a strict code of internal loyalty, championed by his coach, Pat Quinn.
Quinn had one golden, unbreakable rule: never, ever throw a teammate under the bus to the press.
You handle every grievance, every mistake, behind the closed doors of the locker room. When the microphones are in your face, you protect the team.
And Mats internalized this completely. When he was named the captain of the Maple Leafs in 1997, making history again as the first European captain in the franchise's long history, this became his defining leadership trait.
The Toronto media is famous for asking leading questions, trying to bait players into criticizing their teammates or the coach to generate a headline.
And Mats simply refused to play the game. He gave incredibly boring, cliché answers on purpose.
He effectively became the eye of the hurricane. The media, the fans, the pressure swirled violently around him, but he remained utterly, stubbornly calm in the center.
He absorbed the pressure so his teammates didn't have to.
Which makes the climax of his career in Toronto so deeply tragic, because that very stoicism, that fierce, protective loyalty he showed to the organization for 14 years would eventually be cynically weaponized against him by the very people who benefited from it.
This brings us to 2008, the no-trade clause drama. For me, reading the sources, this is the most infuriating, revealing section of the entire deep dive.
Mats is in his late 30s. He has been the captain for over a decade. He is giving his prime physical years to the city.
But the team around him is aging, they are losing games, and management decides it's time to tear it down and rebuild. The general manager, Cliff Fletcher, asks Mats to meet him in Raleigh, North Carolina.
During this meeting, Fletcher asks Mats to waive his no-trade clause. The team wants to trade him to a contender before the trade deadline so they can acquire young prospects and draft picks in return.
To understand the friction here, we really need to brutally deconstruct the concept of loyalty in professional sports.
Exactly, because the hypocrisy is staggering. Let's look at the history of that specific contract. Years earlier, Mats was a highly sought-after free agent. He could have gone to any team in the league and demanded maximum money.
Instead, he took what is known as a hometown discount. He accepted significantly less money than his market value to stay in Toronto because he wanted to win there.
In exchange for taking a pay cut, the team gave him a no-trade clause. It was a legally binding contract, a mutual negotiated show of commitment and stability.
But the moment the team's fortunes shifted, and that contract was no longer economically beneficial to the organization, the narrative was instantly rewritten.
Management, quietly feeding the media, began a campaign to guilt him into waiving the clause.
The media turned on him viciously. They framed his desire to stay in Toronto, his simple desire to honor the exact contract they had written and signed, as selfish.
Columnists wrote daily pieces accusing him of lacking leadership, of holding the franchise hostage, of preventing the team from executing a necessary rebuild.
This exposes a very uncomfortable truth about the sports entertainment complex. I mean, the industry demands absolute romanticized loyalty from its players and its fans.
They sell jerseys based on loyalty. They demand players take discounts for loyalty.
But the instant a player's economic utility drops, that loyalty just evaporates. It reveals that in the eyes of management, players aren't humans with families and loyalties. They are depreciating assets on a spreadsheet.
I really want you, listening to this, to transpose this situation onto a normal corporate profession to see how insane it is.
Imagine you are a top-tier executive. You agree to take a massive pay cut to stay at your current company because you love the city and want stability for your family.
In return, your employer puts an ironclad clause in your contract stating you cannot be relocated.
Then 3 years later, the company has a bad quarter. Your boss and the local newspaper launch a coordinated daily public shaming campaign calling you a selfish, toxic leader because you refuse to rip up your contract and move your family to another state just so the company can save some money.
It is absolute madness.
The psychological toll of that betrayal was immense. Mats is essentially being told that the only way to prove he loves the team is to leave it.
We see the strain of this during a moment in Philadelphia. Mats goes on a long 4-mile walk with his trainer, Matt Nickel, just to escape the hotel and vent.
He is incredibly frustrated. He's asking Nickel, I love this city. I want to win here. I've given my life to this team. Why does that make me the bad guy?
And then he delivers a line that I think perfectly encapsulates his entire worldview. He looks at his trainer and says, I'm the captain, and the captain is supposed to go down with the ship.
He refused to waive the clause. He stood his ground, endured the daily media beatings, and played out the remainder of his contract.
When the season ended, he was effectively forced out. Not on his own terms, not with a grand farewell, but simply because his contract expired and the management made it clear they didn't want him back.
After 14 years of bleeding blue and white, he was suddenly adrift. He had to find a way to author the final chapter of his career on his own terms.
But before we get to his final season in the NHL, we have to look at his international career, because the emotional whiplash he experienced playing for Sweden perfectly mirrors the extreme highs and toxic lows of his NHL journey.
International hockey, particularly the Olympics, carries a completely different kind of pressure. It's national pride. And in 2002, at the Salt Lake City Olympics, Mats experienced the absolute nadir of that pressure.
Sweden, heavily favored, suffers one of the most shocking upsets in hockey history, losing to Belarus in the quarterfinals.
The reaction back in Sweden was apocalyptic. The Swedish media, echoing the same toxicity we saw in Toronto, went completely scorched earth.
They literally printed the players' faces on the front pages, formatted like criminal mugshots.
Underneath each face, they printed the player's multi-million-dollar NHL salary and ran headlines openly accusing them of treason.
Think about the absurdity of that word, treason. For losing a sporting event, it highlights how quickly national pride curdles into vicious scapegoating.
But the beauty of sports is that it occasionally offers a chance at absolute redemption. 4 years later, at the 2006 Olympics in Turin, Italy, Sweden fights its way back to the gold medal game.
And their opponent is Finland, their ultimate geopolitical and hockey rival.
And where's Tommy Sundin, the man who built the backyard rink during the biggest game of his son's life?
He is sitting on his couch in Sweden. He outright refused to fly to Italy.
Why? Because he was convinced he was a jinx.
He attended the losses in Nagano and Salt Lake City, so he decided his presence was bad luck. You simply cannot argue with the superstitious logic of a sports parent.
Mats is playing on a legendary line with Peter Forsberg. Henrik Lundqvist is shutting the door in net. And in a fiercely contested game, Sweden prevails. They win Olympic gold.
Mats describes the aftermath standing in the massive public square in Stockholm, looking out at tens of thousands of fans dressed in yellow and blue, singing the national anthem as the ultimate dream come true.
The very same media and fans who had printed his face as a traitor 4 years earlier were now weeping tears of joy and hailing him as a national hero.
He achieved his redemption on the international stage, but he still needed closure in the NHL.
Following the bitter exit from Toronto, he spent months agonizing over his future, dealing with severe anxiety over whether to retire or keep chasing a Stanley Cup.
Halfway through the 2008-2009 season, he finally signs a short-term contract with the Vancouver Canucks.
Which brings us full circle, right back to the nightmare in the hotel room that we opened the show with.
It's February 2009. Mats is returning to the Air Canada Centre in Toronto for the first time, not as the beloved captain, but as an opponent.
The stress dream about the snapping laces was his subconscious buckling under the weight of the impending emotional collision.
And the game itself unfolds like a Hollywood script that would get rejected for being too melodramatic.
The game goes into overtime, still tied. It goes to a shootout. Mats is selected as the third shooter for Vancouver. The game is entirely on his stick.
As he steps onto the ice, 20,000 Toronto fans are screaming.
But as he begins to skate toward the puck at center ice, he describes experiencing a profound psychological shift. The deafening noise of the arena suddenly cuts out.
It's as if a mute button is pressed in his brain. The anxiety, the history, the media narratives, they all just vanish.
He says in that exact moment, gliding over the ice, he felt like he was a kid again, back in his driveway in Sollentuna, playing street hockey with his brothers Patrick and Per.
He skates in on the Toronto goaltender, and he executes a move he actually learned from his former Leafs teammate, Vesa Toskala.
He does this subtle fake-a-deke to completely freeze the goaltender, making him commit to one side, then swiftly pulls the puck to his backhand and roofs it right into the top netting.
He scores! The Canucks win the game!
And the moment the puck crosses the line, the mute button in his head releases. The sound rushes back in.
But it's not the sound of a home crowd booing an opposing player who just defeated them.
No. The Toronto fans, who just watched their own team lose the game, stand up and erupt into wild, deafening cheers entirely for him.
It is a surreal, beautiful moment of closure. He finally got his farewell.
And when you look at that moment, you realize the chaser mentality had finally reached its conclusion.
Matt spent his entire life chasing. He chased Patrick on the frozen lake. He chased the NHL dream across the Atlantic.
Chased the ghosts of Leafs legends in Toronto. He chased an Olympic gold. And ultimately, in that shootout, He chased down and captured his own peace.
And he found that peace not by adopting the ruthless persona of the business that surrounded him, but by relying on the exact foundational values his parents built into him back in that house on the hill.
The discipline, the routine, the ability to compartmentalize the noise, and the insistence on staying true to his own character.
We have to fast forward to one final scene from the book, set in 2024, because it perfectly closes the loop on this entire journey.
Mats is now in his 50s, living back in Sweden. He is driving his own son, Nathaniel, to Hovet Arena in Stockholm for a youth hockey game.
As he is driving, Mats realizes his stomach is in knots. He is incredibly nervous.
And in that moment, looking at his son in the passenger seat, it hits him. He is feeling the exact same pregame anxiety his father, Tommy, used to feel driving him to the rinks 35 years ago. The wheel has turned completely.
It's a beautiful realization. If we synthesize everything we've unpacked today, it becomes clear that this is a story about the architecture of resilience.
Mats Sundin survived the absolute chaos of the Toronto media market, a market literally designed to devour players who show emotional weakness by building a psychological fortress out of routine and integrity.
He navigated a deeply cynical business without letting it rot his core values.
So, what does this all mean for us? Here is a provocative thought for you to chew on as we wrap up. We, as sports consumers, demand that our athletes show absolute romantic loyalty to our cities.
We want them to kiss the logo on the jersey, to take pay cuts, to bleed for our entertainment.
But the business of sports is fundamentally ruthless, unfeeling, and transactional.
If an athlete like Mats Sundin, a man who sacrificed his body and shielded a franchise from controversy for 14 years, can be branded a villain by management and media simply for demanding that his employer honor a contract they willingly signed, then who is the loyalty really for?
Does the sports entertainment industry actively exploit our human emotional attachment to the concept of loyalty just to cover up its own cynical business practices?
It's an uncomfortable question, but an essential one to ask yourself the next time you hear a player being vilified by pundits for making a business decision in a league that treats them as disposable assets.
Think about that the next time trade deadline day rolls around and the media starts demanding sacrifices. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
And remember that image of the snap skate laces in the dark hotel room? Sometimes the heaviest, most paralyzing pressure we face isn't the opponent across from us, it's the weight of the expectations we carry in our own heads.
Until next time.